In these two movies, we're going to look at our options for dealing with errors in PHP. During the course of testing any of our projects, we're inevitably going to come across quite a few of PHP's error messages. And very possibly, despite our best efforts, our end users are at one point or another going to end up seeing one of these error messages as well. Now, the kind of error message that we really don't want our users to have to see is the standard error message that's put out by PHP when it runs across an error. Let's take a look at one of our scripts. This one we made in a previous chapter. This one is for dealing with the feedback that a user gives when visiting a hypothetical website. What we're going to do is introduce arbitrary syntactic error into the code. Now, we have the db variable here, and if we introduce an extra letter, then the dbn variable has never been set, is therefore empty or null, and MySQL selectDB function attempts to carry out the selection of a database on a non-existent connection. This will inevitably generate an error. Let's save our script, and we're going to go back to the HTML page which contains the form with the data that we're going to send. As you can see, I've put some random dummy data in to test this script, and we're going to try and submit this form and see what happens when PHP runs across our deliberate error. Now, two things are wrong here. First thing that's wrong is that we really don't want to see this, because if it can't do what it intends to do, then we don't want to be seeing any comment to the effect that the comments have been effectively added to the database. They haven't. Our PHP script is broken down, as we can see from this error message. The other thing that's wrong with this page is that this is really an ugly error message. This is very useful to us as programmers because it tells us what script the error's on, exactly what line the error happened, and what kind of error it was. This error was a warning. There are different grades of errors which we'll get into later on in the next movie, and this tells us what kind of problem it came across when it generated the error. So what can we do, first of all, to avoid getting this thank you message that we shouldn't be seeing, and also to replace this error here with something more user-friendly? Let's take a look at our script. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the die command. And what the die command does is it works very similar to the exit command we looked at in an earlier chapter, and that is it terminates execution of the script. As soon as a die command is carried out, the script will stop. The difference is that die allows you to generate some kind of message to explain to the user why everything stopped at that point. We use the die command in this case in conjunction with the OR statement, and that is set up with this syntax. And we're simply going to say, as our error message couldn't select database, let's save that, go back to our browser, go back to the previous page, and submit the data again. As we can see, our custom error message has come up beneath the ugly error message. Now, this page is slightly better. For one thing, we've got our custom error message coming up, and we haven't got the spurious "thanks, we've entered your comments on the database," which came below erroneously. So clearly the user knows that the comments haven't been added. However, we're still getting this very ugly error message, as well as our custom error message that we specified. So what can we do about this? First of all, if we go back to our script, at the beginning of this line we can add an ampersand followed by a space. All this does is suppresses the generation of any standard errors that might be put out by this line being executed. If we save that, go back to our browser and submit the form data again, as we can see, this line on its own has been output. No ugly standard error message to confuse the user. Still not very helpful though, and it still doesn't fit in with the aesthetics of our site, very basic though they may be. For instance, here we have an example of a problem that has been caused by the user not entering the right kind of data. In this case, the email address that they entered was an invalid email. We have the whoops header, and we have a hyperlink at the bottom here. Now we could add all of this simply into here as a very long literal string, but we'd be better off including it as a function at the end of our script here, or at the beginning. We can put the functions wherever we like, but the reason why it would be much better as a function is that we're going to be repeating this data several times wherever we want to add one of these possible error messages that are going to pop up. So let's call our function fail. It's going to take one argument, string variable, message, which is going to consist of our error message, and what it's going to do is essentially copy this text. So let's copy this out of here and pop it down here. Now at the moment this is written as HTML, and the way we output it before, earlier in the script, was to use the close PHP tag and then simply put this all in as HTML. However, we're going to be replacing this with our string variable message. So it's going to look confusing if we have to hop back into PHP and say echo message, go back in. That's a possible way of doing it, but it might be simpler and clearer if we simply echo each of these parts here to make it absolutely clear what our function is doing. So we're simply going to put our message there with a concatenation operator and then our line break, and then let's say we put this on a separate line just to keep it simple, and we're just going to put a double quotes around that and curly brackets here. The only other thing we need to do is replace these double quotes with single quotes for reasons I've explained before, which are essentially that this counts as an opening string. The next double quote that PHP comes across is going to be counted as the closing quote mark. So we need a single quote mark to differentiate. Let's save our script. We have to also add the function to the die command up here. Now, there's our fail function, and it sits here as the argument to the die command. Let's save our script, and we're going to try this on the browser. We're going to resubmit our data with the deliberate error still in the script, and we're going to see what happens. As we can see, This is a much better system because it remains consistent with what will happen if, for instance, we enter an invalid email address. If we just put in something that's obviously not an email address, we're going to get something very similar as our error message. So, although to us there is an obvious differentiation between an error that's generated by PHP and an error that's generated by our script itself, our users don't need to know about that distinction, and it will in fact confuse them more if they're coming across sudden ugly errors like the ones we found before. So we can see that this is a much better way of dealing with the errors that may pop up within our PHP scripts. We can also replace these errors here, or these messages here, with the fail function. And since every time we use our fail, we're also going to want to exit the script, we could also enter that exit as part of our fail function, which is not going to be used when we use it as part of our die command, but it is going to be used when, for instance, we're checking to make sure all the fields are filled in, or checking to see that the email is valid. So again, we can use the please enter a valid address, and we're going to lose this little bit of HTML, and as we can see, much clearer, more concise script, no repetition, by using a function. And we can use that function both for validation like this and for error checking like this down here. We're going to look at another more comprehensive way of dealing with errors in our next movie.